A single call to the Pentagon was all it took to dismantle careers and prove that injustice can't stay hidden. It was supposed to be an ordinary drive through the quiet backroads of Louisiana, the kind of place that barely registers in the rearview mirror. General Naomi Ellsworth had made trips like this countless times. No escort, no fanfare, just her, a rental, and a clock ticking down to a confidential meeting at Barksdale Air Force Base. But somewhere between Lake Charles and Shreveport, near a little town called Mosswood, her encrypted phone began to lose signal. The call she needed to make couldn't wait. Not an hour, not even 10 minutes. She spotted a faded old gas station. Kelly's Fuel and Food Inn steered her car into its cracked parking lot. The place had seen better days, but it would do. Naomi parked off to the side, away from the few people loitering near the entrance, chatting in the sticky southern heat. To her, it was just a brief pause, a quiet corner to make a critical call. She stepped out, holding the phone up for better reception. General Ellsworth confirming identity. Beginning classified transmission, she said in a low, steady voice. On the other end, a Pentagon liaison immediately began the high-security briefing. Real-time upgrades. Mission-sensitive details meant only for top clearance. Even while listening intently, Naomi remained alert, her gaze subtly scanning the area as instinct demanded. A few of the locals began to glance her way. She wasn't from around here. Her demeanor, posture, and quiet focus didn't fit the mold. No badge, no uniform, just jeans, a cap pulled low, sneakers, and a military-style jacket. Nothing flashy. That was the point. But one person watching saw something else entirely. Behind the counter inside, Paula Sweeney was watching through the dusty window. She was in her 50s, hair pulled into a tight bun, lips pinched in permanent judgment. To Paula, Naomi wasn't a military officer conducting top-level business. She was a stranger acting off. Without hesitation, Paula picked up the old landline and spoke quietly so no one would overhear. Got a woman out by the pumps, she said. Looks shady. Might be on something. You should come check her out. She hung up before they could ask questions. Across town, the board officers heard the radio call crackle through. Nothing exciting ever happened in Mosswood. A little confrontation wouldn't hurt. They tossed on their shades, hopped into their cruiser, and sped off. Back at the station, Naomi was still focused on the secure call. Vital information was being relayed, data that couldn't be paused or delayed. She had no idea that trouble was already closing in as she began to receive her next directive. The flashing lights lit up the glass of the gas station. Her instincts kicked in instantly. She lowered the phone, eyes narrowing at the reflection. Gravel sprayed as the patrol cars skidded to a stop. The doors flew open before the engine even settled. Officer Randall Cooper, a broad, square-jawed man in his 30s, stepped out, one hand already at his weapon. His partner, Officer Shaw Delaney, younger and twitchier, mirrored him, posture taut with anticipation. Naomi felt the tension shift like a pressure drop before a storm. She calmly placed her secure phone on the hood and raised both hands in plain view. Her voice stayed even, professional. Afternoon, officers. Is something wrong? License and registration, Cooper barked, not asking demanding. Naomi took a slow, deliberate step, reaching for her wallet. Of course, my identification is right here. I'm General Naomi Ellsworth, active duty. I'm currently on assignment. Delaney scoffed. A general? Seriously? Naomi held out her military ID and official travel orders with the practiced calm of someone who would face far worse. Cooper grabbed them, barely glanced, then sneered. Yeah, this is fake, he said, letting the documents slide off his fingers and fall onto the hood. Naomi blinked, caught off guard. Sir, I can assure you, don't speak. Delaney interrupted sharply. You think you can play us? You're in the wrong place to pull that crap. By now, people had started to gather. Curious customers, workers, passers-by, eyes were turning. But Naomi didn't move, not because she was frozen, because she was trained, because even though she wasn't in uniform, she still wore it on her back, in her spine, in every calm breath she took while two men ignored her words, her rank, and her truth. What they didn't know was this: the phone still resting on the hood had been live the whole time, and the Pentagon had heard everything. The gas station had been quiet until she pulled in. Naomi Ellsworth, in plain clothes and a rental car, had hoped to be in and out unnoticed. But something about her presence drew attention. A few lingered nearby, watching with interest. some laughing, others whispering. None of them intervened. Naomi's instincts, honed by decades of service, urged calm. De-escalation was her training, but her gut told her the situation had already crossed the line. These officers weren't looking for information. They'd made up their minds the moment they saw her. She tried again, keeping her tone even, controlled. "Please contact your supervisor. You're making a serious mistake." Officer Cooper didn't pause. He already had the handcuffs out. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Naomi didn't move, not in defiance, but because something inside her resisted. Something that had had enough. "I am a general in the United States Army," she said, voice cutting through the heat in the air. "You are detaining me illegally." Cooper laughed an open, mocking laugh that bounced off the gas pumps and drew smirks from the bystanders. "Yeah, and I'm the damn president. Now turn around." Before she could speak again, the other officer, Delaney, grabbed her arm. Cooper twisted the other behind her back. The cuffs locked down hard, biting into her skin. Naomi gritted her teeth, pushing down the rising tide of fury and humiliation behind her. The secure line to the Pentagon clattered to the ground. The voice on the other end was shouting for her, but neither officer acknowledged it. Maybe they didn't hear. Maybe they didn't care. Cooper slammed her against the car. The force rattled the door. Gasps broke from the small crowd. "Got her," Delaney said. Like she was a trophy, Naomi stared straight ahead, her reflection fractured in the grime-streaked window of the station. At that moment, she was no longer a general. To them, she wasn't even a human being. She was just something to overpower. But in Washington, chaos was already unfolding. At the Pentagon, Lieutenant Commander Bryce Hanley was glued to a blinking line on a monitor labeled Gen. Ellsworth, secure. The sound feed was nearly unintelligible background scuffling, broken voices, then silence. "General Ellsworth, this is Operations Command. Do you read?" "General, respond." He repeated into the mic. No reply. Colonel Dana Sharp was already moving. She scanned the feed, jaw tightening. "Track her location immediately." Within seconds, a blinking icon lit up on the map nowhere near the military base. She stopped at a gas station off Highway 171, Mosswood, the technician reported. Sharp didn't blink. "Get Barksdale security on the line." "I want Jag. Passed in. If something's happened to her, we're moving now." Back in Mosswood, Naomi sat cuffed on the curb, her back pressed to the wall. "What's your real name?" Delaney loomed over her. "Who are you really working for?" Naomi breathed out slowly. "You've got my ID, my orders. Everything you need's in the folder." Cooper snorted. "You're a breath away from getting charged with obstruction. Keep talking." She said nothing. No way she'd give them the satisfaction of watching her plead. From the edge of her vision, she noticed phones coming out, people recording, whispering. The station manager stood at the entrance, arms folded, grinning like it was entertainment. Everything was spiraling and nobody seemed interested in stopping. It stopped. Then Delaney's radio crackled. "Unit 3, confirm you have detained the subject." Cooper grabbed the mic. "Affirmative. Female, early 40s, uncooperative." A pause. "Be advised," the dispatcher continued. "Subject is federal flagged. Repeat, federal flagged. Pentagon has initiated emergency protocol. Release immediately and await instructions." The blood drained from Cooper's face. Delaney's grin vanished. "What the hell?" he muttered. Naomi didn't say a word. She simply watched them. Cooper, visibly shaken, fumbled for his keys and unlocked the cuffs. He mumbled something, a fractured apology mixed with uncertainty, but couldn't meet her eyes. Naomi stood, slow and composed. She flexed her wrists, red and sore. The station was silent now. No one dared speak. Even the manager had lost her smug look. The show was over, but the consequences had just begun. She picked her phone up from the pavement. Its screen shattered and the connection severed. Whatever sensitive data had been on it might now be exposed. Without flinching, she stared at both officers. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice calm and razor-sharp. "Not tomorrow, not next week, today." Cooper opened his mouth, likely to offer some weak justification, but the sudden glare of more flashing lights swept across the lot. Only this time, it wasn't local law enforcement. A fleet of black SUVs roared in, tires screeching against the asphalt, the urgency unmistakable. They weren't there for a discussion. Naomi didn't wait for them to reach her. She had already begun to steel herself for what was next. The SUV doors flew open in sync, a scene straight out of a military thriller. But there was no pretense of drama in their movements, just sharp precision and quiet command. At the front strode Lieutenant Colonel Darren Mosley, mid-40s, eyes sharp, demeanor all business. With a manila folder tucked beneath his arm, he made a beeline straight for Naomi. "General Ellsworth, are you hurt?" he called out, his voice firm but concerned. "Just scratches," she replied curtly. The real damage was to their careers. Cooper and Delaney visibly stiffened. The shift in energy was undeniable, and they suddenly realized just how badly they miscalculated. The military personnel formed a protective perimeter around Naomi, instinctively shielding her from the Mosswood officers without needing a single instruction. Mosley turned toward Cooper and Delaney, his face carved from stone. "Your order to stand down effective immediately," he said, cold and clipped. "You are now subject to a federal inquiry. Any attempt to interfere will be treated as obstruction." Cooper stammered. "We didn't know who she was." "That's no excuse," Mosley cut in, his voice steely. "You had her identification. You had everything you needed." Delaney tried to posture. She was acting suspicious. Mosley let the silence hang between them before replying. "You saw a black woman on the phone and made a decision, one that will follow you for the rest of your lives." The officers didn't reply. Naomi was quietly escorted to one of the SUVs. The door closed gently behind her. As the convoy rolled away, she cast one last glance out the tinted window. Cooper stood frozen, wiping sweat from his brow. And Paula disappeared inside the station like something that couldn't survive the light. Inside the vehicle, Naomi remained quiet, eyes fixed on the highway, her thoughts a swirl of fury and focus. Colonel Mosley eventually broke the silence. "Pentagon's launching a full-scale investigation. Internal Affairs, Civil Rights Division. It's going public. Mosswood won't be able to contain it." Naomi didn't respond with any expression. Her voice was flat but firm. "They should have known better." Mosley nodded solemnly. "Now they'll learn what it feels like to be truly seen." The convoy pushed forward through stretches of fields and telephone lines, heading for the base, a place where Naomi's authority would finally be respected again. But she knew deep down, the real war had only begun. By the time she was halfway through her debriefing at Barksdale, the incident had gone viral. Cell phone footage, grainy and unfiltered, had made its way online. It captured the two officers cuffing her while she clearly stated her rank and identity. No yelling, no resistance, just the quiet degradation of someone being humiliated by people too arrogant or too prejudiced to care. The footage caught fire across the country. By morning, the tiny town of Mosswood was the focus of a national uproar. News outlets ran the video repeatedly. Analysts condemned the officers' actions. Civil rights leaders called it a textbook example of racial profiling and misuse of power. Even military and veterans groups, usually reluctant to enter public controversies, issued formal statements of support for General Ellsworth and demands for accountability. Back in Mosswood, the local police department was in full-blown crisis mode. Their quiet little town had just become the symbol of everything wrong with unchecked authority, and the nation wasn't going to let it slide. Asterisk Vernon Grady, a man far more comfortable in the woods tracking deer than standing under a barrage of media questions, stood rigidly behind a podium as the cameras rolled. Sweat beaded under the brim of his cowboy hat. "We regret what happened," he mumbled, avoiding the sharp eyes of the press. "The officers have been placed on leave while we investigate the incident thoroughly." But he didn't get to finish. A young journalist from Baton Rouge interrupted him sharply. "Chief Grady, why did trained law enforcement officers fail to recognize clearly presented military identification? Was this racially motivated?" Grady fumbled for words, muttering vague phrases about confusion and heightened tensions. But the room had already heard the truth between the lines. The department had no real defense, and the story was quickly unraveling. Cooper and Delaney, the two officers at the center of the incident, had disappeared from public view. Their names, however, spread like wildfire, trending online, filling headlines and sparking furious discussion. Anonymous sources from within the police department confirmed that both men had faced past accusations of excessive force, racial profiling, but those had been buried quietly. This time, though, nothing was getting swept away. Civil rights lawyers from major cities filed formal complaints. The Department of Justice announced it would conduct its own investigation. Even the governor of Louisiana issued a scathing public statement, calling the treatment of General Naomi Ellsworth a disgrace and a stain on the state's record. This wasn't just about Naomi anymore. It became a symbol for everyone who had ever been seen as less because of how they looked, what they wore, or what others assumed they were inside Barksdale Air Force Base. Naomi was now in the eye of a political and cultural storm. She fielded calls from her legal team, Pentagon officials, and even representatives from the White House. Each question she answered in the same calm, commanding tone she had used leading troops into battle. But when the door closed behind her at night and she was alone in her room, the weight of it all settled heavily on her chest. Not because she hadn't expected it, but because even after nearly 3 decades of service, decorated tours, and advising top national leaders, none of it had been enough to protect her from being misjudged. In a dusty parking lot in a forgotten corner of Louisiana, still, Naomi hadn't lived her life by running away. She wasn't about to start now. When she chose to speak, it would be on her terms, deliberate, unfiltered, and for more than just herself. She knew there were countless others who had suffered in silence. Her voice could carry them to dot. The press event was scheduled for Saturday, just outside the gates of Barksdale. By mid-morning, reporters had already swarmed the area. Cameras stood like sentinels, microphones clustered in messy stacks. The atmosphere buzzed with the tension of something about to erupt. Naomi emerged in her formal uniform, a symbol of discipline and sacrifice. Her medals caught the sunlight, but her eyes were darker focused, unwavering. She wasn't there for applause. She wasn't there to placate anyone. Colonel Mosley stood off to the side, flanked by senior Pentagon officials who had offered her pre-approved remarks in safe phrases. She turned them all down. When she began, her voice rang out over the noise, clear and firm. My name is General Naomi Ellsworth. I've spent 29 years in service to this nation, leading in war zones, shaping policy, upholding the very values written into our Constitution. She paused, her silence louder than the hum of engines and clicking shutters. And yesterday, none of that mattered. A hush settled. In that moment, I wasn't seen for my service or my sacrifice, she said. I was seen through the narrow lens of skin color and bias. That is what judged me. Furious scribbling echoed from the reporters, but Naomi wasn't speaking to them. She was speaking to everyone who had watched the footage and felt the same sting of familiarity. I didn't come here for an apology, she continued. I came because staying silent isn't an option. Respect, dignity, and accountability, these are not optional values. They are not up for debate depending on who you are or what someone assumes about you. In the distance, a crowd had gathered, locals, veterans, students, and families holding signs. Naomi saw their eyes, some filled with frustration, others with cautious hope. She knew what they needed wasn't another soundbite. They needed truth. What happened to me is not new, she said, but change only comes when enough people choose not to look away. Her final words came quietly, without theatricality, just conviction. I wasn't the one humiliated yesterday. They were, and history will remember that. She turned and walked away without fielding a single question. At first, only a few. Hands clapped, but soon the applause swelled into something stronger. Something real, an echo of shared experience and long silence voices. Naomi walked with steady, measured steps, not faster, not slower, as she always had, carrying the invisible weight of every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. She knew the world wouldn't shift overnight. It might not even shift in her lifetime, but if even one voice found courage in hers, if even one assumption was questioned, then something had changed, because silence might be safe, but truth is powerful. And when justice stumbles, it's our voices that help it rise again.